Time to take a look at the more contemporary issue again, namely the Russian concept named Maskirovka, which can be simply described as Russian military deception. But it is quite complex, and depending on who you ask, it has evolved widely and may now even be central in Russian grand strategy. So at first, let's try to define or at least describe Maskirovka briefly. The first description is from Major Morgan Meyer. In his report of 2016, A Little Masquerade, Russia's Evolving Employment of Maskirovka. He notes, Maskirovka is the historical word used to describe deception in Russia. Translated into English, Maskirovka means a little masquerade. Like other complex cultural ideas, Russia's conceptualization of deception defies simple definitions. Additionally, Maskirovka's central theme is the presentation of a believable falsehood to conceal the truth. Now, Charles Smith, a professor for defense intelligence in the late 80s, defined it as follows. Maskirovka is most simply defined as a set of processes designed to mislead, confuse, and interfere with accurate data collection regarding all areas of Soviet plans, objectives, and strengths or weaknesses. Yet probably the widest and most encompassing description I found was from a strategic analyst, Julian Lindley French, in a policy paper for the Canadian Defence Foreign Affairs Institute in 2015. Maskirovka is in fact war that is short of war, a purposeful strategy of deception that combines use of force with disinformation and destabilization to create ambiguity in the minds of alliance leaders about how best to respond. Note that I don't necessarily agree with this description, but it provides a stark contrast to the previous two, who focused on the military aspect, whereas Lindley French is a strategic analyst working at a think tank that wants to influence NATO policy. Now in this video we'll first and foremost look at the military aspects of Maskirovka. Thus we will stick to Major Meyer's and Smith's views, and their articles are also the major source for this video. Maskirovka is not a new concept. It can be traced back to the Imperial Russian Army in the late 14th century. Additionally, authors note that it is a cultural aspect of Russian society and not limited to the military. Yet this is not really explained nor expanded in detail, so I'm a bit skeptic here. Originally, Maskirovka used concealment to create surprise and thus gain an advantage on the battlefield. Yet it has expanded beyond concealment to facilitate surprise, placing greater emphasis on creation of ambiguity, uncertainty, or for controlling responses of potential adversaries. Especially during the Second World War, the concept was expanded and the Soviet General Staff noted that surprise was a clear indicator for the success of an offensive operation. During the Cold War, the defensive aspects, especially on the strategic level, were given more considerations. The concept clearly did survive the end of the Soviet Union. Yet since the US paid less attention to Russia for quite some time, several developments might have been missed. Meyer notes that contemporary operations by the Russian Federation Armed Forces use Maskirovka as a fundamental component in military operations. Since Maskirovka deals to a large degree with disinformation, this is ideally suited for the information age. In this context, the following words of the military historian David Glantz in 1987 sound quite prophetic. More easily understood is the effect that changing technology has on prospects of using Maskirovka. It is in this area that the potential effects of Maskirovka's future use have been most pronounced. But let's look at the goals, forms, and principles of Maskirovka. Maskirovka has three goals: surprise, interference with the enemy's decision-making, and preservation of combat power. Surprise results in a multiplier in combat power. As previously mentioned, the Soviet General Staff during the Second World War recognized that surprise had a major impact on the success of combat operations. Whereas interference with the enemy's decision-making should ensure that the enemy takes inappropriate action. So it is a more proactive stance than the famous Napoleon quote, "Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake." For example, marching towards Moscow. But back to the topic. Decision-making can be influenced in two areas: the human and the technological element. Let's take as an example sensor readings, which are used by the decision makers. Hence the targets could be individuals using the information systems or the information systems themselves, which can be done in various ways. For instance, injecting wrong information but also changing the sensitivity of sensors. This is of course military terminology. In the civilian sphere, a change in the sensitivity of sensors could be achieved through an overrepresentation of certain information. For instance, how bad ads are shown on YouTube, or very emotional content, like showing images of dead or wounded children. Note these two examples are typical for certain forms of media in general and also used throughout history. But back to the main topic. The final goal would be the preservation of combat power. This basically improves the survivability of troops and is noted as a secondary role by Major Meyer. Now let's move on to a very abstract description of the overall processes of Maskirovka. And they are as follows. Now the starting point is logically, but also quite ironically, the truth. Next, one's intentions must be determined. Is it about hiding the truth or creating a false truth? And what action should the enemy take? Then we need to take a look at the available resources. This means time, terrain, personnel, and technical possibilities. Finally, the enemy's countermeasures and capability must be considered. How well is the enemy's recon, surveillance, and other capabilities? That ensures that the deception is appropriate. After all, the enemy should be able to detect the false information, but not be able to identify that it is false. Maskirovka itself can use 4 to 5 forms, depending on the author. Those are concealment, imitation, simulation, demonstration, and disinformation. Concealment is considered as one of the primary forms. It is all about the degrees of chances of detection of units, equipment, industry, plans, or any other aspects. In short, concealment hides friendly information from the enemy. Concealment is the simplest form, and also one that needs the least amount of coordination and can be thus used mostly independently. Typical examples are smoke screens to hide troops, the construction of tanks in factories designated for car production, or moving units under the cover of darkness. Imitation is the next form. It involves the creation of false objects that appear to be real. This could be fake tank turrets. A more complex example is to use a mock-up bridge that was placed near previously destroyed but then repaired bridge. Yet it still appears to be damaged. Thus the enemy should be tricked in attacking the decoy bridge. The active form of imitation is simulation. Whereas a wooden tank turret may look like a turret, it doesn't act like one. With simulation, smoke, heat signals, movement and other behaviors would be added to create a more deceiving impression. The next form is demonstration or feints. This means the use of real troops to a large degree. Although simulation might involve a certain amount of legitimate troops, those are very limited. Whereas in demonstration they could carry out a feint attack or perform a major troop movement. Another way of demonstrations is the use of extensive recon operations on areas which are not subject to operations. Note, units involved in such operations might not even know that they are conducting demonstrations, which in case of capture would also increase the operational security. The final and probably most relevant form in recent years is disinformation. And it is also quite interesting what Smith wrote about this in the late 1980s. As practiced by the Soviets, this information has received a great deal of attention in recent years. Now consider this in context of Lindy Friend's article from 2015. Moscow has established a new level of ambition, strategic Maskirovka, by which this information is applied against all levels of NATO's command chain and wider public opinion to keep the West politically and military off balance. This information is the use of false information or half-truths to mislead. It can also include staged activities or fake products, like maps. This information is not limited by the audience. For instance, lies could be told to their own troops as well, thus including false orders or misrepresentation of weapon capabilities. Note that Maskirovka is applied on tactical, operational and strategic level. Yet some forms are usually applied more on certain levels. For instance, concealment and imitation are usually used on the tactical level. Whereas on the operational and strategic level, simulation, demonstration and disinformation are more common. To increase the success of Maskirovka, there should be 4 principles applied: plausibility, activity, continuity, and variety. Be aware that Smith notes that these principles were not described in the Soviet military encyclopedia. Yet various principles are discussed in books and articles. He chose those 4 because those seem to be the most consistent. Additionally, there seems to be quite some different views on these principles depending on the author. The first one is plausibility. After all, if something makes no sense or seems odd, the enemy is probably not going to believe it. For instance, fake defensive position construction in an area that is hard to defend is not very plausible. Similarly, other aspects like size, intensity, dispersion, etc. also must be according to doctrine and or regular behavior. The next one is activity. To mislead the enemy, there must be a persistence in deception. Thus, activity ensures that false ideas stay alive and ensure consistency. For instance, that on fake basis that equipment is moved around or that radioactivity changes at certain points in time. The next one is continuity. This doesn't just mean continuous effort, but more to allow a continuous application from start to finish. Smith notes that the successful implementation of Maskirovka on a factory means that already during the planning and construction, consideration must be given to these aspects. Thus, continuity means that for every step of an operation, measures are taken. One example when the Soviets didn't follow this was during or before the Cuban Missile Crisis. The lack of proper concealment of the construction allowed US recon flights to discover the missile sites. Finally, there's variety, which should prevent predictable measures. Humans tend to notice patterns of behavior. Hence, repeating certain activities can betray a deception. Hence, novel approaches and creativity should be employed. Well, this finishes my little intro into Maskirovka. Depending on how well this video is received, I might do a follow-up of this with various case studies. Now, if you're in need of a dose of freedom now, I recommend watching Mattis' Way of War. Or if you're more into rockets, maybe a look at the German V2 rocket and its effectiveness or lack thereof. As always, sources are linked in the description. Special thanks to TechArrow and Justin for supporting me on this video. Thank you for watching and see you next time.